A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for the Jesus' truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's topic, I wanted to read through this chapter in the book of Judith. And basically, it's a bit of a, I don't want to say like a continuation, but a bit, of a, just in a bit of addition, in regards to a lesson I did yesterday about sackcloth and ashes and the heathens, basically putting forth legislations to try and basically persecute our people, right? And I wanted to read this an example of not only the use of sackcloth and how it was used in times of mourning, but also basically the fact that basically in this example, Judith makes a very she makes a prayer unto the Lord, right? And that's one of the things that's likened unto, your prayers are likened unto basically like an incense, right? Like how you have during the Levitical priesthood, how you would actually have incense, during the time of Korah's rebellion. When you go into Numbers, the 16th chapter, when Aaron basically he burned incense as an example of atonement, right? So just to show that our prayers also are likened unto that that incense, right? As a matter of fact, I want to prove that real quick, and then I'll read the chapter. This is because we're and in these times, remember, we are the sacrifice, right? This is Psalms 141 verse 2. I'll start at verse 1 here, and it says, Lord, I cry unto thee, make haste unto me, give ear to my voice when I cry unto thee, right? Like it says in Ezekiel, to the men that sigh and cry about all the abominations thereof, right? It says verse 2 here, and here's really the point. It says, let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice, right? So showing you, our prayers are also likened unto that incense, right? Because we want the Lord to basically remember us in like it says in Habakkuk, in the midst of the years, in wrath remember mercy, right? So just like how you see all these different calamities, recently you had that earthquake in Venezuela and so on and so forth. You had those are examples of the Lord's wrath, right? So we want the Lord to basically have his hedge of protection over us, right? Especially when brothers, when you leave your house, say a prayer before you leave your house, because the scriptures say, the love of many shall wax cold, right? You seeing that the vibration of people is very strongly influenced, by not just the weather, but their situations, right? And they're very one with their flesh, right? So not to ramble on too much, let me read this chapter here, and Lord's will, this lesson would be edifying, right? And it says in Judith, this is Judith chapter 9 verse 1, and it says, and Judith fell upon her face and put ashes upon her head and uncovered the sackcloth wherewith she was clothed. And about this time that the incense of that evening was offered in Jerusalem in the house of the Lord, and Judith cried with a loud voice and said, O Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem El Shai of my father Simeon, to whom thou gavest a sword to take vengeance of the strangers who loosed the girdle of a maid and to defile her, and discovered the thigh unto her shame, and polluted her virginity to her approach. For thou didst, for thou saidst, it shall not be so, and yet they did so. So basically, what Judith is referring to here is an account within our history when basically you had the sons of Jacob. They basically got their vengeance, or got their lick back towards some heathen that tried to defile their sister Dinah, right? Let me read that, just to actually prove the point, because what I find very interesting when you read through a lot of these different accounts in the scriptures, there's always what is a common theme you'll notice is that the person who is making their supplication is always they tend to refer to some sort of event that took place, right, within our culture, within our history, right? So it helps to bring back the remembrance of those things, and also what the Lord basically did to help out that particular person within that situation, right? And a good example of that was when you read the story of the Maccabees, when the men where Judas, basically he's giving them like a talk of encouragement, and he spoke about the miracles that the Lord did for us when we were fleeing Egypt, right? So that's one of the things that you'll notice when you refer to a lot of these different accounts here, right? So let me just prove that. Okay, this is Genesis 34, verse 25, and it says, "And it came to pass on the third day that when they were sore, two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, like she just mentioned, Dinah's brethren," so Dinah was the daughter of Jacob, remember that, took each man his sword and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. And the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister, right? So the dude, he slept with the wife, right? And they were given unto, they were basically, they were heathens, right? They were strangers. They were not of our own people. But Judith is basically referencing this account here, right? And that always brings back to remembrance of certain things within our history, right? So this is continuing her prayer, her supplication, and it says, "Wherefore thou gavest their rulers to be slain, for so that they dyed their bed in blood, being deceived, and smotest the servants with their lords, and lords upon their thrones, and hast given their wives for a prey, and their daughters to be captives, and all their spoils be divided among their dear children, which were moved with thy zeal, and abhorred the pollution of their blood, and called upon thee for aid. O Yahweh Bashem El Shai, O my power, hear me also, a widow." Right? So this is her supplication. Verse 5. "For thou hast wrought not only those things, but the things which fell out before, which ensued after. Thou hast thought upon the things which are now and which are to come. Yea, what things thou didst determine were ready at hand, and lo, we are here. For all thy ways are prepared, and thy judgments are in thy foreknowledge. Behold," so this is present time of what's going on in the situation. Now she's going to get into it, right? Just a little brief summary. Now you have these heathens. They were wondering about these people on this mountain, speaking about the Israelites, and they didn't I don't want to say pay tribute, But basically, Holofernes, set up men, and he set up garrisons to control basically the water supply. So the water supply is where we used to go and get water from. And they basically had done their research on, who these people were. This is what their God likes. Their God hates wickedness, so on and so forth, right? So, they got a lot of intel in regards to our people, right? Just to show you how well studied these other nations are, and our people don't actually take the same diligent approach in regards to the studying of their own enemies, because they're in an environment where they're so comfortable, where they think that they don't have enemies, right? It shows you this is a very good book, because it shows you how well studied as a nation you Israelites are, right? And how these other nations, especially Esau, tries to do certain things to separate you from your power, right? To actually make you to basically stumble and cause offense, right, to your power, as opposed to actually trying to help you and be in tune with your power. The scriptures say to turn thou, O Jacob, that thou mayest be illuminated, right? So being illuminated to this understanding, knowing how your enemy fights, right? Knowing what your enemies did, it brings you back into remembrance of what, so you know how to operate, and you know how to navigate, right? In these times, right? Because these heathens are really not original. If you think about, when you go through this story, they were controlling the resources, and that's exactly what Esau does today. When you think about it, he controls he has the fatness of the earth, right, so to speak, right? That's in the book of Genesis, right? So their descendants are doing basically the same thing, right? Today, right? Let's see here. Where was I? Verse 7, Judith chapter 9. And it says, For behold, the Assyrians are multiplied in their power. They are exalted with horse and man. Their glory in the strength of their footmen. They trust in shield and spear and bow and sling, but they know not that thou art the Lord that breakest the battles, and the Lord is thy name. Throw down their strength and their power, and bring down their force in thy wrath. For they have proposed to defile thy sanctuary and pollute the tabernacle, where the glorious name resteth, to cast down with the sword and the horn of my altar, right? And we know we are the tabernacle. We are the temple. Our bodies are a temple, right? So when you think of it in today's terms, Esau being that modern day Assyrian, he wants to defile your temple using his digital ID device system, that micro C-hip, right? That's one of the ways he wants to defile your temple, defile your bodies, right? So there's really nothing new under the sun, right? That's why it's so good to know, your own history, so you know and understand how your enemy fights. Some of the things they did in the back, in the ancient times, will give you more understanding in regards to what's going on today, right? So this is verse 9 here, and it says, Behold their pride, and send thy wrath upon their heads, and give into mine hand, which am a widow, the power that I have conceived. Smite by the deceit of my lips the servant with the prince, and the prince with the servant. Break down the stateliness by the hand of a woman. For thy power standeth not in the multitude, nor in the might of strong men, but for thou art a power of the afflicted, a helper of the oppressed, right? And this is the situation we're in when you really think about it, right? We're basically like, sheep amongst wolves. So we need a higher power. We need Yahweh Shai to throw down their their rulerships, because he wants to defile the Lord's woman, if you really think about it, right? This is the kind of power we need. We need a strength. We need divine intervention from above. You know, just like how the Lord came to King Hezekiah's defense, that's the kind of power we need, because we're basically oppressed. We're troubled on every side, as Paul said, right? Where was I? It says, verse 12. I pray thee, O Yahweh of my father, Yahweh Bashim Shai, the inheritance of Israel, right? So showing you this is always about Israel, right? When they make this is another reason, this is another clue. You can say that, the scriptures is only really for the nation of Israel, right? Because when you see when our people were afflicted, they always, in certain cases, in certain accounts, they always referenced stories of ancient Israelites, right? Just like how I mentioned the story of Maccabees, like Judith, when he was speaking, to his men, he referenced Moses. He referenced that time when the Lord came through for us during the time of Exodus when we were in Egypt, right? So it's always about our people. You know what I'm saying? The scriptures say he hath not dealt so with any other nation. There's no other nation, that the Lord is so closely nigh unto, right? Where was I? Not to go too off topic. And it says, I pray thee, O Yahweh Pashim El Shai of my father, a power of the inheritance of Israel, Lord of the heavens and earth, creator of the waters, king of every creature, hear thou my prayer. Make my speech and deceit to be their wound and stripe, to have proposed cruel things against thy covenant, right? So it's the same mindset today. Esau proposes cruel, like it says in the Psalms, frameth mischief by law. Let me see if I can find that. This is Psalms 94, verse 20, and it says, shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by a law? They gather themselves together against the soul of the righteous and condemn the innocent blood. But the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Shai, is my defense, and the Most High is a rock of my refuge, right? So this is the kind of, situation that we're in, right? So just like how she's praying for the downfall of the Assyrians in her time, we're praying for the downfall of our enemies, right? Because this is the condition that that we're facing, right? We don't have the military capabilities. We need we need miracles, man. We need miracles in these times, right? So let me just finish this up. Continuing on in Judith chapter 9, verse 13, and it says, thy hallowed house against the top of Zion, and against the house of the possession of thy children, to make every nation and tribe acknowledge that thou art the Most High, and the power of his might, and there is none other that protecteth the people of Israel but thou, right? So there's no other God, besides the Most High, Yahweh Bashim El Shai, right? Where was I? Okay, I wanted to get just a quick one in the book of Sirach here, because she was mentioning this is basically like a prayer, and she's making her supplication. This is Sirach chapter 35, verse 16. This is verse 17 actually, and it says, okay, I'll start at verse 16. It says that he that serveth the Lord shall be accepted with favor, and his prayer shall reach unto the clouds, and the prayer of the humble pierceth the clouds to the come nigh, he will not be comforted, he will not depart until the Most High shall behold and judge righteously and execute judgment, right? So the Lord needs to execute judgment, not just upon the wicked of our own people, but also upon these heathens, right? That frameth mischief, through their different laws and decrees, right? So this is the power that we need. This is something that we need, because we're basically worms or sheep, in the midst of wolves, right? So let me get this last one here. This is Tobit chapter 12, verse 8, and it says, prayer is good with fasting and alms and righteousness, and a little with righteousness is much better with unrighteousness. It is better to give alms than to lay up gold, right? So this is, just to kind of more emphasize the importance of prayer, right? Amongst other things, to basically have that sweet smelling sacrifice unto the Lord, right? So we have a sacrifice where the Lord remembers us, and has respect unto our sacrifice, like our forefather Abel, right? So anyways, that's pretty much the point. I kind of wanted to read that in regards to the importance of prayer, the significance in ancient customs when it comes to wearing sackcloth. And back in those times, they wear sackcloth and put ashes upon their head, and it was basically like a representation of mourning. We wanted to get, essentially, we put us in a very I guess you can say it's a humble state. It's not like other royal apparel, like when you think about like wool or linen or any of these different type of plush, luxurious fabrics, right? It's a very coarse material that was normally made from the hair of camels, or I believe goats as well. But it was a very coarse material, so it was a bit rough on the skin. So it kind of it emphasized a mindset of basically discomfort, right? Not, and as opposed to plush materials like wool is more like, it's high vibrational, and it kind of it brings a feeling of more of ease, right? So it's of a material that, speaking about the sackcloth, it speaks of it's more referring to it's basically just a representation of mourning, just to put it in a nutshell, right? So I kind of just wanted to read this, and Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Until next time, I say shalom.